When you think of Singapore today, you probably picture a modern, bustling city. But have you ever stopped to wonder how it all began? We're not going to talk about the famous leaders or the big political plans. Nope. Today, we're telling the story of the real builders of Singapore, the everyday migrants, the traders, and the workers who, piece by piece, built this city from the ground up.
You know this ship. Of course you do. It's the Titanic. But what on earth could the Titanic possibly have to do with Singapore? Well, when it set sail back in 1912, it was part of this huge global movement of people searching for a better life. And while lots of them were heading to America, thousands upon thousands of others were making their way to a small, promising island called, you guessed it, Singapore.
Exactly. This was an era of incredible migration. People were on the move all over the planet, and Singapore became this massive hub, a magnet for people from all corners of the globe. So let's get into it. Here's our game plan for today. First, we'll look at why people packed up and moved. Then, we'll see what kind of jobs they did when they got here. After that, we'll explore how they built a whole new society. And finally, we'll get real about what life was actually like under colonial rule. Okay, so let's start with the most basic question of all. What would make you leave behind everything you've ever known to start over in a completely new place? The official word for it is migration. But that one little word covers a huge, life-changing decision, right? It's never simple. So what was really going on? Well, a good way to think about it is with two ideas: push factors and pull factors. Push factors are all the bad things that, well, push you away from your home. Things like poverty, famine, or war. On the flip side, pull factors are all the good things that pull you towards a new country, like the promise of a great job or more freedom. And let me tell you, Singapore had some seriously powerful pull factors. I mean, think about it. Its location was perfect, right smack in the middle of the world's biggest trade routes. It was also a free port, which meant no taxes for businesses. That's basically a giant neon sign flashing, "Open for business." And on top of all that, it had a free immigration policy, so it was pretty easy to get in. All of this added up to one thing: jobs, jobs, and more jobs. Singapore was an absolute magnet for opportunity. Okay, so once all these migrants arrived, what did they actually do? Well, pretty much everything. They filled every role you can imagine, and they literally built the city from the ground up. To build a city, you need all sorts of people, right? You need the big thinkers, the entrepreneurs who start the businesses. You need the muscle, the laborers, who do all the heavy lifting. And you need the experts, the craftsmen, who have those special skills. Let's meet a few of them. And just look at how diverse this group of business people was. You had European traders like Alexander Laurie Johnson. You had smart Chinese Peranakan businessmen like Tan Kim Sang, who acted as middlemen. You had Arab families like the El Kafs investing in property. And you had Indian merchants like Naraina Pillai selling beautiful textiles. It was like the entire world set up shop in Singapore. But the real backbone of the city, that was the laborers. These were the people doing the incredibly tough physical work. You had Chinese coolies clearing dense jungles, the iconic Samsui women in their famous red headscarves working on construction sites, and even Indian convict labor, who were sent here and put to work building some of Singapore's most famous landmarks, like St. Andrew's Cathedral. Honestly, their hard work made everything else possible. Now, as more and more people arrived, Singapore needed more than just ports and roads. It needed a community. It needed schools and hospitals. The big question was, who was going to build them? You'd think the government would step in, right? But back then, the British colonial government was way more focused on making money from trade than on social services. As one writer put it, way back in 1854, it was totally shameful that a city as wealthy as Singapore wasn't doing anything to educate its kids. So, if the government wasn't building schools and hospitals, who was? The people were. Individuals who saw a problem, who were, as this quote says, moved by the plight of others, and who decided to do something about it themselves. A perfect example is Maria Dyer. She was a missionary who, back in 1842, started the very first school for girls in Singapore, many of whom were poor or orphaned. And get this, that school still exists today as St. Margaret's School. It just goes to show how regular people, not the government, were building the caring, essential parts of the city. And it's the exact same story with healthcare. Tan Tock Seng was an immigrant who became a really successful trader. He saw how the poor had no way to get medical help, so he donated a huge amount of his own money to build a hospital just for them. And of course, that hospital is still here today, and it's still called Tan Tock Seng Hospital. But this brings us to a much tougher part of the story. Because while all of these amazing people were building a city and a community, they were living inside a system that was fundamentally unfair.
So, who was actually making the rules? Let's look at the government, the Legislative Council. The only thing you really need to see here is that the British governor's team, the official members, always had more votes. And they had to vote however the governor told them to. So, no matter what the local members wanted, the governor could always pass any law he wanted. The system was designed to keep the British in charge, period. But that did not stop local leaders from fighting for their people. You had leaders like Yunus Abdullah, who fought to secure land for a Malay settlement, and you had Dr. Lim Boon Keng, a brilliant doctor who campaigned to ban the harmful opium trade. Even though the system was stacked against them, they never stopped advocating for their communities.
This quote from an educator at the time just says it all. In colonial Singapore, salary and skin color were what mattered, not personal merit and achievement. Europeans got better pay, better jobs, and access to exclusive clubs. It didn't matter how smart or hardworking you were as a local, you were always seen as second class.
Okay, that was a lot to cover. So, after all of that, what are the most important things you absolutely need to remember from this story? Let's break it down into 3 key takeaways. First, powerful push and pull factors were the engine that drove migration to Singapore. Second, it was the immigrants themselves, not the government, who built the city's social foundations like its schools and hospitals. And third, despite all their contributions, life under colonial rule was unequal, with a system designed to keep power in the hands of the British. And that brings us to one last question for you to think about. We've just heard the story of the people who built Singapore with their own hands, their own money, and their own dreams. So why is it that so often history books only focus on the colonial rulers who held the official power? It really makes you wonder, who gets to write the history of a city?